Okay, hello. Thank you for volunteering for my Girl Scout project. I'm just going to videotape you answering some easy questions. And if there are any questions that you want to skip, just say so. Or any questions that make you uncomfortable, you can say pass, and I won't ask you those. And if you do not wish for your stories to be public information, please tell me so at the end of the interview. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Okay. What is your full name and age?
Barbara Fritz is my middle name now because it was my maiden name, and Reyle is my last name, spelled R-E-Y-L-E, but pronounced Reyle. And I'm 83 years old.
Okay, and were you an immigrant or a natural-born citizen?
I was born in Rhode Island, so I'm a natural-born citizen.
Okay, and were your parents immigrants?
Yes, my mother was a World War I war bride, and my dad was a Canadian citizen at the time, but they both became American citizens. And so I was born an American citizen.
Okay.
Where was your mother from?
My mother was from England, the Wales part of England, and she enlisted in the British Women's Army Corps, the British WACs, in World War I. And my dad was in the Canadian Royal Air Corps during World War I. And their camps, their stations, I guess you'd call them, were both on Salisbury Plain, where the Stonehenge is, and they met each other there. And so 2 years after the war was over, in 1920, my mother came over as a war bride and married my father in 1920. So that's the story of my not being I'm a first generation American, I guess that's what you call me, because they were both from other countries.
Okay. What is your favorite childhood memory?
One thing that really stands out is that my father, in order to find a job during the Depression, ended up finding one with the Navy as a civilian in 1934, and he had to go to Panama for this job, and he had to go before the rest of the family could go because there was no quarters for us down there. It was almost like halfway like a military base, and there were no quarters for us. And so he went down and he went to work right away, and about 4 months later he found some quarters for us, and so we went down. And during that period of time, I was just 4 years old, and I was so convinced that I'd never see my father again, because every day seemed like an eternity. And one thing that made me very, very happy and so reassured me was when we arrived in Panama by ship. We were approaching the dock, and my father, I don't know how he managed to do it, but he persuaded somebody to let him go on the dock and way out to the very end where he could see the ship coming in. And so when I looked over the side of that ship and saw him there and knew that he was still with me and we were going to be a family again, that's one of the happiest memories I have of my whole childhood. And then we were a family again for a long time. So, and we lived there until I was 20 in Panama. We came back occasionally to the States for a vacation, but it's all I remember mainly of my childhood, Panama.
Okay. Was segregation prevalent where you lived?
Very, because in the Canal Zone, there were a lot of West Indians that had come to Panama to work on the canal and had stayed there, and they were very, very much segregated against. They had whole towns built for them, and towns built for the non-black people. And I can remember that one of them was called Silver City, because the black people were paid in silver, and the rest of the towns were paid in gold. So they were called, they had their own names like Balboa and Cristobal, but they were the gold towns. But the silver towns were black people, and they were in huge gosh, like multifamily buildings. Um, they were clean and adequate, but they were very different. They went to different schools. However, there was a lot of friendliness between the Panamanians. The Panamanians, most of them are descended from the Spanish, and some of them very, very wealthy. And many of them their parents paid the extra cost of sending them to the Canal Zone schools, because the Canal Zone schools were very good. So I got to know a lot of Panamanians, and but very few black people except as servants. So
Were they paid in silver just because it was less?
Yeah, it was less valuable than gold, and the non-blacks were paid in gold. This would have been at the time, well, from the time of the building of the canal until, I guess, it seems to me it would be sometime after World War II before those black towns, silver towns, were torn down and better homes for everybody were built there. And of course now the Canal Zone, what used to be the Canal Zone, is no longer a Canal Zone. It's part of the Republic of Panama, and it's very few, well, there are few Americans down there, but not very many. It's mostly Panamanians and many black people, and they're integrated, and there's no limitation on where they can live or where they can eat or where they go to school or any of those things. Of course, there's still very different classes economically, but there's not discrimination that I knew as a child.
Have you been there recently?
It's for a couple of visits. I went back down there to be married, but that was just a couple of years after I got out of college up here, and things hadn't changed a whole lot. But I've been back twice since the Canal Zone was turned over to Panama, and it's very different. They've changed the names of some of the streets. For instance, Roosevelt Avenue is now called Rosamena Avenue or something very Spanish name, and the 4th of July Avenue, how U.S. can you get, has a different name. So it has a Spanish flavor, but it's still. I remember well, I even found the houses I lived in when I was a child. They haven't changed all that much. So things are much better there in a lot of ways. And the Panamanians have done a wonderful job of running the canal. That was one of the things that everybody thought, oh my, the canal's going to disintegrate, but they're doing a very good job. And right now they're building new sets of locks that can accommodate bigger ships, so that some of the ships that now can't go through the canal will soon be able to. And the Panamanians are overseeing that. They're not doing the building, but they're overseeing the companies that are. So I felt good about it. The last time I went back was about 1.5 years ago. And I really I was glad I went, and I felt good when I left there because I knew that things were better than they were in a lot of ways than when I was a child. Although it was a wonderful place to grow up, personally, I really enjoyed everything that they had. Summer all year round, and good schools, and they had good pay for the people who were on the gold roll. It was a good place to grow up.
Okay. Have you ever met anyone famous or interesting?
Well, one time, my mother was a Girl Scout leader, by the way, and one time Eleanor Roosevelt was visiting the Canal Zone. This was during World War II, and for some reason my brownie troop was asked to do a little bit of something to honor her, and so at some kind of a gathering, I didn't even know what it was, I was given the job of handing her a large arrangement of flowers, tropical Panamanian flowers, and that was pretty exciting. So I think I was about 8 years old. Are brownies 8 years old? Are they still brownies when they're 8?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. I think I was
Yeah.
about 8 years old. But that was exciting. And then during the war, there were a lot of, through the USO, a lot of Hollywood stars came down and entertained the troops there because there were a lot of American troops brought in during World War II to protect the canal. And so, well, they would sometimes they would go to Europe and entertain there, or to Pacific. But fun once in a while, a couple of them came to Panama. Bob Hope came to Panama, I remember, and that was pretty exciting. So, but I didn't meet him. I mean, I just went to the one of his performances that was held down on one of the piers that in the Navy. In a Navy installation, yeah. So
That's cool.
a few. Oh, and one year, I think this was after the war, the New York Yankees did their spring training in Panama. So I saw Phil Rizzuto and Yogi Berra and, you know, a lot of those famous people. But as I say, just watching. I didn't meet them, saw them.
That's
Yeah.
still cool.
So that was kind of fun.
Okay. What is the most fun or interesting thing you have ever done? Feel free to brag.
I think that one of the most fun things I ever did was I biked a lot as a child. And so when I was, maybe about 50 years old, married, and had a couple of kids that were pretty well on their own, my husband and I went on some biking elder hostels to Europe. It was done through the Elder Hostel organization, and we went to the most amazing places on bikes. We did 5 of these elder hostels, and each one lasted about 2 weeks. And we went to, the first one was to Germany and Austria down the Danube River. And then the later one was to Germany, just Germany, on the upper part of the Danube River. So I've really seen 500 miles of the Danube River, because there's a bike path right along the river that used to be a tow path to pull the ships through, or boats through what sections they needed help with. So we did that, and we went to England on one, the flat part of England, which is where the military base, our Air Force bases were during World War II when Germany was being bombed. That's kind of a sad thing, but anyway, it happened. And then we went to one in Italy, and that one ended up, our bikes were put on a bus with us, and we were taken up to the top of the Alps somewhere. So that was a good idea, because the bike trip in Switzerland was all downhill from up in the Alps to down in Salzburg, Germany. So that worked very well. And so those, all of the, well, I think the first one that we took was such an outstanding first adventure for me that I remember that one best. But all 5 of those trips were, I would think, the most fun and interesting things that I did as an adult. Yeah.
Great.
Great. We already talked about that. What is the greatest injustice you have ever witnessed?
I would say I don't like to think of it as prejudice, but the discrimination against the black folks when I was a child. It was so, we were just like in different worlds, and the only black people I got to know were our maid and people that were servants of in some form. And when I look back on it, I see it as something that was really not a good thing. And I'm very, my opinion, my attitude now towards blacks is wide open. It's just, I have no feelings of discrimination against them at all. In fact, when I first came up to college in the States after finishing those first 2 years in Panama, was placed in a house at college, like a dormitory, where there was a black girl. And, you know, when I first saw her, and she lived in the room just like all the rest of us and ate at the dining room and did everything else that we did. It was in our classes, a very intelligent person, and I still know her, I still am in touch with her. And you know, at first I thought, that just seems kind of different. You know, not that it bothered me, but I thought, that's just different. I've never had quite an experience like this before. But she was a lovely girl and very friendly and intelligent and had a delightful family. And I think she was one of the best ways for me to just change my attitude and say, hey, this is great. And I think that sort of got me off on the right path. And after that, I just had no problems at all. And when I first came to Washington, which is what I did after I finished college, there was still discrimination here. Blacks couldn't eat in the restaurants where we could, and they sat in the back of the bus and all that sort of thing. And that I thought, that's not right. You know, I was at 20 years old. I knew that was not right. So I really think that the way I've been introduced to accepting anybody was just done the right way, not because I caused it to do that, but because of the way it worked. So.
Where did you go to college?
I went to Smith College. It's a women's college in Massachusetts. And that was quite an adjustment because I hadn't spent a winter where there was a winter until from the time I was 3. The last winter I spent in the States before I went to Panama, I was 3 years old. And so the first winter I spent after that was my junior year in college. And it was, I thought you could ride a bicycle down the street with snow on it, but you can't. You don't, you fall down right away. And we all rode bicycles. The students couldn't have cars at Smith during those days. And so we all had bicycles. And the first snow that came along, I got on my bike and thought I was going to go to class, but I didn't. I ended up walking. So that was kind of an interesting thing. But I really made the adjustment, I think, pretty well. But Virginia's just right for me. It's not, don't have long winters like we did in Massachusetts, and yet we do have summers and warm weather and summers that are like Panama.
So what brought you to D.C.?
The job that I got right out of college, my main goal at the time was to go and see Europe. And so I took the job that paid the most. And the best paying job was with the National Security Agency, this agency that's been in the news quite a bit lately. But anyway, that's where I went to work. And there were a lot of military people associated with them. In fact, the head of the whole agency was an Army general. And that's where I met my husband, because he had just come out of college and the ROTC program. And so he was a second lieutenant in the Air Force. And I met him, and all of a sudden my plans to go to Europe didn't seem that important. And we were married, and 7 years later, I think it was 7, maybe 9 years later, he took me to Europe. So I did get to Europe after all, but not exactly the way I had originally planned. And then those biking trips, they came later.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How long did you date your husband before you got married?
Let's see, about a year, you know, because they had a training school for the National Security Agency, and it was really just a place to keep us while they did our security clearances. And so I met him there very casually among, you know, a lot of other people. But then when I was stationed, I was finally placed out in Arlington at the NSA headquarters. which is where it was then. And my husband was out there also at the headquarters, and so that's where we met. And then we started to date then, and we were married about a year later.
Okay. Tell your favorite story about your spouse.
My favorite story. Well, he was a good sport because my parents were still living in Panama at the time, and we decided we were going to be married, and I wanted to go home to be married, and so he was willing enough to come, and he made all the arrangements for him. It was harder for him to come because he was in the military, and we had to go. Part of the trip we had to go by way of Colombia, where this country in South America, and there they don't like American military people very much, and so he had to get some kind of special permission to even go there. We had to go there because that was before jet planes, and in order to get to Jamaica, where we were going to have our honeymoon, we had to go from Panama to Colombia to Jamaica. And so he made all the arrangements for that trip, and I was not expecting there to be any problems, but the way it finally worked out, his mother was going with him to go down to the wedding. She was the only one from his family that was going to the wedding, and so he was going down to Panama with his mother, Mrs. Reyle, and I was going down as Barbara Fritz. And so the airline got the tickets mixed up, and they had him going on his honeymoon, and I was Mrs. Reyle going on his honeymoon with him, but he had him going on his honeymoon with his mother. So I remember that became quite a story, and he was very good at telling that story. He loved to tell stories. But they straightened it out, and we made it to Jamaica, where we spent about a week, and then back here to the States, to NSA.
Talk about your children. How many did you have, and how fun or hard were they to raise?
I have two children. The oldest one is a son, and the youngest one was born 2 years later, a daughter. And I was really very blessed with children that were not difficult to raise. Drugs had come into the picture at that time, and they just never got involved in that. They were good students, and by that time I'd become a school librarian, and I was pretty aware of what was going on in schools at that time, and I think that was a good thing, because I was able to see through some things that were happening in the school, and also with some of the kids that I dealt with as a school librarian. So I really felt that was a good place for me to be, and I think it certainly contributed a certain amount to the fact that my kids just never even thought of drugs. They were good students and of joy to raise. I mean, we had our ups and downs, but overall it was not a problem. And the fact that I was able to continue working as a school librarian, I didn't feel that I was neglecting them or not home when they were home and all that kind of thing, because I just trusted them. I knew that they were okay. I did have childcare for them through about 6th grade, after school and before school. But then after that, I said, you're old enough, and I can't trust you now, I never will, and they just took that seriously and did very well.
Okay. Talk about your grandchildren.
I have 6 grandchildren. My son has 4 children, and the oldest one is a girl, and the 3 younger ones are boys, right in a row like that. And they all live in this area, which is wonderful for me. And I see quite a bit of them. The oldest one is a girl, and she herself is married and has 3 children of her own. So I have 3 great grandchildren, and they're still very little. 2 of them are but one of them's, how old are they now? The oldest one is 5, and then the next one, that's a boy, and the next one is a girl, and she is a 2.5, and the youngest one is the little boy, 1.5. And they live out by Gainesville, and I see a lot of them, and they're just a great pleasure to me. I really do enjoy them. We just went, as a family, we all went apple picking last Sunday afternoon and came home with a bunch of apples, and the kids picked some, and we took a picnic and had a great time. So that I really do enjoy that family. My daughter lives in South Carolina. She has 2 children. One of them is working out in California. She went to college out in California and has a job out there. And I want her to move east again. She told me she's an Eastern girl, but I don't know when she's going to come back. So I do miss her. I see her about, well, just once a year. And then my daughter's son, my grandson, lives with his dad in Florida. The marriage didn't, well, it lasted about 8 years, but it ended then. And so he lives with his dad in Florida, and he's 21, and he's working part-time and going to college part-time. So they've done pretty well too. You know, I have my concerns, but overall, they're good kids.
That's good. Have you ever broken the law?
Well, I've been stopped for, what have I been stopped for? I went through a stop sign, and I guess so that's against the law. I also had an accident that was my fault once, and I had to go to court, so that was breaking the law. But I paid my fine and admitted that I had done something I shouldn't have, and I don't think it's well. I guess for a while my car insurance went up for a while, but I think it's back down to where it used to be now. So that's an adventure. Yeah, it's scary to have a policeman stop you and the flashing lights and the siren and all that. So it's happened to me, but I survived, and I still drive. I don't drive very far. I don't drive at night, but I didn't let that accident make me afraid of driving, which I think is a good thing.
Okay. What is your favorite holiday story with your family or friends?
I guess looking back on things, I guess it was the first year that there was the first year after, my son was born on December 7th, and so that first Christmas when he was around and we had a little family. Well, up until then it was just a couple, and we would always travel somewhere else to have Christmas. But then when we had this little boy, I mean, he was only about 3 weeks old, but we were a family, and we were at home, and we didn't go to somebody else's house. We were just together, and I think that was such a meaningful time for me. I felt it was my first experience of being having a family of my own, that where some holidays were special, and that it gave me something to look forward to down the road with a lot of other holidays and family times. And like this apple picking just the other day was, family is important to me. I really do feel that it's been part of one of the best parts of my life is my kids and my grandkids and now my great-grandkids.
Okay. What other interesting stories do you have?
Let's see. Well, I guess some of the trips that I've taken, besides those biking elder hostels, I've been, one trip that I particularly remember is going out to Minnesota and seeing that part of the world. I'd never in spite of the fact that I've been to Panama for a while, I'd never been east of the Mississippi. And one summer, when I had a good close friend from my childhood living out in Minneapolis, Minnesota with her husband, before I had children, we went out and spent about 3 weeks with them. And one of the things we did was we drove up, we had driven there in our car. So in our car, we drove north of Minneapolis in Minnesota and saw all kinds of interesting things that, for instance, we went to Cass Lake, which is one of the big lakes up in northern Minnesota, and our friends had rented, well, actually they had been allowed to use a cabin on Cass Lake that had belonged to one of their good friends, a couple. And so we stayed there, and we had to go there by boat because it was on an island in the middle of the lake, and we had to go there by boat. We had to take all our food with us because it was a long way back to the little town, and we fished, and my husband and the other husband loved to fish, and so they were always bringing a lot of fish in. So we ate fish, and we just about made we brought vegetables and dessert type things with us, but we purposely didn't bring any meat, and we ate fish, lived off the catch that they made each day, and that was a lot of fun. We really had a good time. There was a little beach on the side of the island that was on the property we were staying, and so we had that to do during the day besides the fishing, and we just lived in a sort of primitive way. It was a nice little cabin, but when we first entered it, it was alive with bats, so we had to get rid of the bats before we could stay there. And so it was just primitive living, and I enjoyed that. It was fun. And then on our way back to Minneapolis after that time at the lake, we stopped at the origin of the Mississippi River. It's just a little spring coming out of the ground, and we saw supposedly where Paul Bunyan did his logging, and we had our picture taken with an Indian chief with all his regalia, and we just had a really good time with this good friend of mine from childhood, and the husbands got along very well, and well, we were friends for a long time after that. My friend is no longer living, but we saw quite a bit of her and her husband often afterwards, after that trip. But it was just a happy adventure, I felt. So that was the first time I'd ever been west of the Mississippi.
Okay. Do you have any other interesting stories you want to share?
Well, we've had some interesting vacations over in this country, actually. One of them was to Block Island, which you may never even heard of. It's just off the coast of Rhode Island, and we dropped my parents were living in Providence at that time because they had retired from Panama, and so we dropped the children off there, and we went to this strange place that off the coast of Rhode Island. It's well, you've heard of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Well, those are well-known islands that are part of Massachusetts, but this one is sort of a different kind of an island. It's not that famous. But we thought my husband thought he was going to be playing golf when he got there because they had advertised in the newspaper that they had a golf course, private golf course, for the little resort we were going to stay at. Well, it turned out that there was no golf course there. They hadn't mowed the lawn yet, mowed the golf course yet, and so he couldn't play golf. But we'd had a good time doing some other things. They had bicycles available, so we rode bicycles all over this little island, and there's a lot of evidence of Indian life. Not currently. There's no Indians there now, but of Indian life there in the early days. And we visited some very nice beaches, and just had a really nice time that I like to go places where it seems like a different world than where I live every day, and that was certainly one of them. Being so remote, and the ferry is the only way to get there. We didn't take our car because, well, you don't really need a car. Bicycles are much better. It's a small island. It's not. We rode all over it and had a good time. So I guess what I'm saying along the way is that we really have enjoyed bicycle riding over a long period of time, and that was certainly one of them that we had a good time.
Okay. Do you have anything else you want to add? Because I'm out of questions.
Well, just that I moved here to the Woodlands about 2.5 years ago because I was a widow by then, had been for a couple of years, and my house was too big for me, and I really didn't need all that space, and things were getting ahead of me. I was trying to keep up with things, and it just wasn't working. So I came here, and I'm so glad that I did. I just really feel that this, I didn't think I had very many choices of what to do. I knew I had to get out of the big house. So this just seemed like the best of the choices. It wasn't it wasn't top of my list of where I'd like to be, but I thought, well, this is it. So I'm here, and I really feel that it's the right thing that I've done, and I haven't regretted it at all. I haven't wished that I weren't here or felt discouraged, or I just feel that I'm, all things considered, where I am in my life, this is where I belong. And I'm very happy. And as you can see, I like my apartment. I just feel that I'm very blessed to be able to be here, and the people are very nice. They've been good to me. So it's just been, I really feel that I couldn't ask for anything more. It's just a good life, and I'm content, which, I don't know, sometimes in the evening when I'm falling asleep, I just count this as one of the many blessings, this being here and in this apartment and with these friends. It's been very good. And I'm so glad you came to visit us here, and I appreciate what you're doing.
Yes, thank you so much for participating.
You're very welcome.
You have a lot of great stories.